running around the house, and pretty soon that plow was just jumping up and down, and it hooked into the corner of a number 3 wash tub, into that ear the handle, and he says that tub was flopping along with the plow so hard that says when that tub came loose, it went clean over the house. And that was the word he used, clean over the house. And of course, my eyes wide open. I just believe in the whole thing, you know.
You talk about his stories. He was out at Charles's Corner one time, and Louis McDonald was there, they was telling tall tales.
Yes, and Louis could tell them just as well.
And Dad says, well, I tell you what, said, I was fishing here back. I caught a catfish, and it's so big, and it took 30 minutes for the hole to fill up where I pulled him out of the water. Louis McDonald said, well, I got to go home.
He had done been defeated.
He used to tell me was about going duck hunting, and a bunch of ducks flew into this pond. Then there come up a cold wind and froze those ducks right in the tracks in the pond.
Oh man!
And the ducks flew off of the pond.
I've actually heard.
So a lot of us things that I used to have confidence in, that my dad told and did, that
he forgot he was telling you.
Meaning no disrespect.
Yeah,
I think
right.
that need to take it with a grain of salt.
Well, yeah, because it got to where he forget he wasn't talking to the crowd with Louis and competing with Louis McDonald. It was kind of a game with them. Who could tell the biggest yarn. And Louis I've heard him tell this one. He said, and they just see him sitting around the old spitting whittle club around the old local store, and he said, well, a lot of his stories was about old Shine. You remember old Shine? It was this big hunting hound dog. They'd hunt coons with him and all that kind of stuff. And Shine, he swore was the best hunting dog and just the best all-around dog that ever lived under the sun, And so he could train him to do all sorts of things. I think, I don't know what all kind of stuff, but the one thing he taught him was he could take, when you would get a coon or a possum, you'd skin them and you'd have a board that you put them over to make them dry, stretched out, I don't know what they call them, skinning board or something like that. Well, he kept working with old Shine over the years, and Shine got to where Louis could decide
the
size of the board, and he told Shine to go. And he wouldn't come home till he brought an animal, a coon that would fit that board. Well, it went along fine. He was doing well. He didn't even have to get out in the cold or anything, just send him out. So one day, his mama actually kind of made a mistake. She was doing her Monday morning chores and all that. And around there on the back porch where old Shine had his bed, he was around there lolled out in the sun, like a hound dog will do. And Mama got through ironing and set the ironing board out there next to old Shine. Old Shine took off, and he never did come home.
Who was this now?
Louis McDonald told that. Old Shine.
Louis McDonald. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. No, this is not your dad. This is Louis's story.
My dad told the same story.
Is that right?
Folks in his youth.
Yeah. And then Louis would tell about, weather among farmers and folks is a big thing. And he would tell about, he'd talk about the weather, and most of the rain there, of course, would come in from the southwest in the spring and summer, and they'd come in from the northwest, but generally from the west. And they'd get to talking about strange things happening, and He's a rain coming in out of the east is really unusual, and that's true today. I mean, that really is fact. And I've seen it happen, and when it does, it usually gives you a really pretty good sized rain. Well, he said one July they were having trouble with the drought and praying for rain and all that. And it says a little cloud formed up over in the east. Kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it just soon it moved it over and started raining, and it just rained so hard you couldn't hardly see. And he said, you know, it never did quit raining. Never did quit raining.
So still at it.
That's right.
I tell you what surprised me about Uncle Lewis is we were back there in
Uncle Lewis?
Uncle Lewis. Yeah, not Lewis, Uncle Lewis.
Yeah.
We was back in the bottoms, duck hunting, and it got dark. And I remember you couldn't hardly see your hand in front of your face.
Oh, yeah.
And then Uncle Lewis knew the bottoms well enough that he let us out of there.
It's a frightening feeling. You know, all of those brothers grew up around that, and they knew, and your dad was good at that, knowing what slough was what, and how they were related to one another, and kind of how to read the directions in the woods without a compass and that kind of stuff.
Did you ever hear of Uncle Lewis hogging fish? You know what they do when they hog fish?
Yeah, I've heard of hogging. I hadn't heard the Lewis story, I don't think.
Well, supposedly he was with a bunch of them, I think down around Hunter Springs, maybe. And there was a tree with a, you know, how the cypress trees have big bases.
Swelled at the
Then
butt.
they got an opening, usually. Well, this one had an opening, but the opening was below, you know, below water level.
Uh-huh.
And Uncle Lewis dove in and went into this, supposedly, went inside this tree. Of course, it was dark in there.
Yeah.
And he was fooling around catching the fish and handing them out the door. I mean, out the hole.
A bunch of them in there, huh?
Huh?
A bunch of them were in there. He just handed them out.
But he,
That sounds like a
then-
Stewart story.
then,
Come and join us.
they couldn't,
Let you sit right here and rock him if he needs it. Or you can sit over there if you want to.
It doesn't matter.
they started beating on the side of a tree. And said,
Why,
Lewis,
you can go ahead and sit there.
come on
That's
out
fine.
here.
Sorry, Carol.
Oh, there's more fish in it. Lewis, come on
And
out
lay
of there.
those pillows anywhere you want to, off on the floor, up on this.
They got out and found out he had our water moccasin out to him.
Oh, no goodness gracious.
Like I say, I don't know whether that story's true or not.
I don't really like to think about it. I'll dream about that tonight. And then you know what's the term? Fishing.
Hogging.
Hogging.
Hogging fish, you know how
There's
what
another
that is?
term.
You go under the water,
Yeah,
you
that-
just catch them in the hole
come
with
up
your
the
hands
church
and
thing,
come out with them. And Uncle Lewis, he was just telling, was up in a cypress, in a slough, in a cypress tree that had an opening in it. And he went up in there handing out, catching and handing out fish. And by mistake, he handed out a water moccasin snack.
Who's doing that?
Uncle Lewis and Fernie?
Oh my.
Supposed to.
Yeah.
Woo.
Now, where that story come from, I don't know. I didn't dream it up.
Yeah, no, that's too good to dream up. Well, I got lots of them, but this one is especially good. Jim here had a bunch of cousins that lived beyond his house from us, and it was also kind of through the woods. And it's down there just right about where the Rainer place is, at that corner where, you know, you take that blacktop out of, from Showalter's corner, and right there, well, there's a new house there now, but her house sat right in there, and his Uncle Todd was off working or had left the family, or he wasn't around for several years when I was a real small kid. And those kids, to help make a living for Aunt Ola, they would work different things around, and people were pretty good to hire them out. And my dad would hire them to do farm work. Well, T was a really mischievous one, and he was what, 3 or 4 years older than we are, maybe 2 or 3 at least. You remember
I
Chief?
think so, I don't remember.
Put those on
But
the
he's kind of
floor or
mischievous,
on
and
the-
I guess they
anything
had
you
a
want
father
to.
image and so on, so he was the one that Stuart, one of them, liked to pick on, not that Uncle Stuart was too particular about who he would pick on, but he, and you'd have to know the setting too, between Jim's, where I grew up and Jim's house was, that's a quarter of a mile, wasn't it? Yeah. And it went through the woods for the most part, but there was a field behind Jim's barn, so you'd kinda come out into a field that had kinda grown up with some bushes by that time. But you'd have to walk through this path that went all the way from T's house to my dad's. You had to walk through Stewart's barn lot, go through a gate, walk in a kind of a path road combination through the yard and proceed on down the road. Well, T, at the end of one day picking cotton, he had started home, and before he went, his mama liked for him to bring produce like eggs and stuff, milk and things that we raised for part of his wage, and so I don't know if they charged him or whether they just gave it to him. Anyway, the point is, he had a dozen and a half eggs in a brown paper bag. And as a kid will do, he would have been, T would have been, oh, I don't know, 6, 8 years old probably. He was carrying this paper bag of eggs just stacked up in the bottom of that bag. And he was, he, as a kid would do, he had his cotton sack with him, but he had it down over his head. And you see, all he could see was 2 feet in front of him, and he was keeping the path, just entertaining himself, you know. Well, Stuart was at his house, saw him coming up from my house, and he got to think how funny that would be if he just stretched out across that path beyond the gate there where T would see him, but too late to do much. So that's what he did.
Oh, no.
And so T came on up, just, you know, minding his own time, and with the sack over his head, and he made it through the gate, and before he knew it, there was Stuart, and he just tumbled right over him, and all the eggs and everything, all of it. And it was almost funnier to watch Stuart tell that story than it was as to what actually happened. Because he'd always beat it down to my dad's house to tell him. And as he'd tell it, he would be kind of like I'm doing actually. He'd say, and he fell clean over me. You know, he just bouncing all over. He really fell clean over it. And I had to go get him eggs and replace his eggs, which he did.
Well,
I thought that
do
was
you
Stein.
remember,
No, that was T.
T.
It was T. Stein was our age. He was
Yeah.
in the same
Yeah.
grade a little bit.
I think he was closer to your age than mine. And that's,
Wasn't that much
pretty
difference.
close together.
No.
Yeah, we're only what, a month apart, or
About a week.
nah, we're about 3 weeks apart.
Oh.
You're 21st June, and I'm
14th
14th.
and 21st,
Right.
so that's a week.
And June comes first, so it's June about 10 more
No.
days, and then
Yeah,
14, about 3
Benny
weeks.
in June. Then me. But do you remember Uncle Todd caught a bobcat in a trap one time? You ever hear of that?
I can't recall it for sure.
Well, they supposedly caught this bobcat and Uncle Todd decided to put it in a cage.
Oh.
Ah, okay, that
So
would be
they got
fun, yeah.
25 pound lard can,
A what?
a 25 pound lard can, and somehow, that's why I'm asking this, you know, I don't know if a story seems so fantastic, but got that bobcat into that lard can, put the lid on it, and then carried it home.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad sat on the lid to the lard can while Uncle Todd built the cage.
Oh, okay.
And I've always wondered, you know, thought about it. Dad sitting on that can, you know, he couldn't get up.
No. And it would take a while to build
Huh?
it'd take a while to build a Bobcat, Walker's cat.
Unless you had one already started.
Yeah, they might have had one started. He probably just got it ready, maybe. Well, those were days, you know, there were certain parts of life back then you take for granted, and that one was the fur trade and selling for a little money. You could sell a possum hide for 50 cents to $1 probably in those days, and that was money. I mean, you know.
Remember making
And
a
a
cross
coon
ties?
hide was worth something. And if you got a mink, you know, you're semi-rich.
Oh, wow,
Yep.
yeah.
Remember us cutting cross ties?
Oh,
I don't
We-
know how many we made. They
well,
were
we
more.
started, Jim, this is the way I tell it. Jim and I started our first million cutting cross ties down there off of his dad's place, right across the fence from my dad's place.
Yeah.
And we worked and worked. I don't think, the one thing it teaches me, Jim, there wasn't much forethought to what, you know, the only forethought we had was, you know, the $1 or $2 or $3, whatever the tie was worth. We were gonna get rich. And we had the real stuff. We borrowed the saws from, I guess, my dad or his dad, and broadaxe, you know what a broadaxe is.
Yeah.
And, point is, I don't think we ever got the first tie that would measure out to the specs.
Yeah. That's
Oh,
it.
my.
We picked the prettiest tree, but it happened it was kinda out in the open, and those tend to get a little more crooked grained, and so the thing never would take shape just right. I don't think we had no idea how we're gonna get to town, and, you know, or how we're gonna, you know, all of that. We're just gonna make the ties. I guess our daddies probably were gonna help us, and they would've.
So you didn't have any expenses, huh?
No expenses.
They didn't think about it.
No, it's gonna be pure profit. That was the good thing about
Hey,
it.
I got one for you.
Yeah.
Remember during the time when it was snowing, and we had a sled about, you know, the size of a toy snow sled.
Yeah. But it made out of wood.
It was coming good snow. We got that thing out on the side of the hill there by the barn.
Yeah, I remember
And you
that.
got on that,
Yep.
slid down the hill.
Yep.
And of course then the creek was about 6 feet deep. And
Yeah,
you
that
jumped the ditch and
Yeah, I
landed
remember a story
in the
about
cross
that.
piece on the tie, hitch in the middle of the back, knocked the breath out of you. And we were wondering for a while.
I know.
Was this the
And,
time?
and what I remember is when you went over the edge, you said, "Goodbye, cruel world."
Okay. Okay, that's what I'm remembering. What I started asking about, but I thought it was Cotton that said that.
Well, the story's kind of over the years gotten garbled. The ditch was dry when Cotton did it, and he
Oh,
fell
really?
into the ditch
Yeah.
and got kind of
Yeah.
riled up.
Well, okay, how about when the backwater was up and Lorraine?
Now see, that's one of my favorite stories too. And see, to really appreciate it, you've got to know the Walker family.
Yes.
Now
Well,
Jim knows the Walker family, but Billy knows the
remember
Walker
Junior?
family.
You remember Junior Walker?
Junior.
Fowler, not Walker, Fowler.
Oh, Junior Fowler?
Junior, no, it was Richard and
Edward.
Edward. Is
Okay,
Edward?
Fowlers and not Walkers.
Well, they intermarried, but there were two families. You know, a High Point, just straight east of my dad's house, up half a mile over there was High Point, and that's where the Walkers came in from the hills. There were hillbillies, Bill. And
Must have been great people.
and your Uncle Pete Eames, I don't think he's your uncle or cousin, whatever, but Pete Eames told my dad one day what was wrong with him. He says, "Bill," that's after he lived in there a while, and they were talking about, they were, no two of them were off in the same way, but it
Yeah.
just almost every one of them were off mentally.
Yeah.
And Pete was this old crusty guy. He said, "Bill, think what's wrong, I think the old cow kicked Everett down one of
think what?
them. The old cow kicked Everett down one of them.
Those who weren't afflicted left as soon as they could.
Yeah, as they got up to maturity,
Yeah, Matt
understood the
left.
real world, they went out and joined it, yeah.
Well, that still didn't get to the story I was gonna tell.
Oh, well, now, here's the deal. You gotta back up a little bit. This family that I've just briefly described, and I think I probably should say no more. And there was this big gorge when the high water was up between their house and the Fowlers, which they were intermarried and eventually did. And when they first moved there, I guess they befriended that family. And if the water wasn't up, you could just go straight across, and it was about half a mile from one house to the other. But when the water was up, intermediate, if it got too high, they couldn't come to my house because they were still cut off. So, but they would come up in front of our house at high water time and walk along, and that would be a quarter, a half,
A lot farther around.
almost a mile to their house from ours, at least 3/4. Then they had the half mile from my house over to the White Oak Road, and then they had that same mile or so to go up to the Fowler place. And not having much else gainfully with which to entertain themselves, at any point during most any part of any day, you'd see one, maybe two, maybe three, drifting in one way, and maybe the set of two here going that way would be the set of three coming from this way. I mean, it was just kind of, they kept the road warm, you know, just walking. And so the water was up, and Lurene Walker had married Richard Fowler, and they had this little girl named Velma Sue, which her mama called Bammer Sue. So Bammer Sue and Richard called her Lurene. And so Bammer Sue and Lurene had been over. They basically, I think, lived with the Walkers, but they had been over to the Fowler place to visit, and so they were on their way back home.
But there was 3 of them, right?
Just 2.
I thought it was Ennis, June, and the baby.
Well, she was born later, or was maybe somewhere. There were just 2 of them, and they came up, and we were working on the addition to the house. Those 2 rooms that were added on later at the back. My dad and I, and probably Cotton, and we weren't big enough to do much, but he had us out there handing him stuff and whatnot. So they came up
We know 2 different stories completely.
because the water had gotten high enough that instead of going straight across, they couldn't do that. They were having to walk up kind of through the edge of your dad's woods and get across up there and go way around that way. So they came to my dad and said, could he get them across, because they knew we kept a boat that would go across the creek, and it was,
Yeah, it had cattle that could grazing on the other side of the water.
Yeah, and so we just kept it there, and they somehow knew that, and so Dad was busy, and he caught him at a busy time, and Lurene weighed what, Billy?
300 or more?
Yeah.
Maybe.
And you can see it.
Is this
shaping
Junior's
up here.
mom?
Yeah.
You can see it shaping up here. The house is up on this hill, and then down the bank, you come into a low place, and then there's a creek, a deep, fairly deep creek. It would have had 6 or 8 feet of water in it at that time. That flowed down to my right, and as you come off from the house. And so she wanted to know if he could get them across. He said, sure, Pratt, run them down there. Why don't you take them, run them down there and get them across? And, you know, fat, dumb, and happy. That's what I tried to do. So I took them down there to the boat. And the boat is, well, almost crossed the creek. Probably the creek is twice wide as the boat is long. So it's tied to this side, no problem. She's got, Lurene has Bammer here on her hip, and not thinking anything about it. I'm not thinking anything. I'm not used to this. So she decided she just stepped right on in to go, and I didn't think anything about it. Well, you know what happens when the weight gets just right on the boat? What happens, the end over there is not tied. This one is. So the thing begins to do like this, and I begin to panic. But before I can do a thing about my panic, whoosh, over the side she went. Separated from the baby. She went under, but she's tall enough I wasn't worried about her, but the little baby went under. The little baby went under the second time. And I grabbed that kid and got it back out on the bank. She said, and she got the baby. Mom was having a fit up the house. They saw what was going on. Couldn't get out there. It was what, 50 yards
50
probably
yards,
down
yeah.
there. So the mom got them. We got them back up there, and they were sitting around in the living room there. And Mom got them cleaned up, dried off, and all this. And Rurine says, "Mamma Sue, West got us a good bath today, didn't we?" And I remember the same city, Mom had some sugar cookies that she brought out, or molasses cookies, one.
Molasses.
Probably molasses cookies, and she brought them out, and she gave one to Velma Sue, and Velma Sue says, "Thank you." And Rurine says, "Velma Sue, say, tell Miss LaFleur clank you. And I, to this day, can embarrass Ellen when I tell that story, because I'll just, out of the clear blue sometimes, she does something for me and say, "Clank you." Just kill her soul.
Well, I want to know what happened to the real good part of that story.
What was it?
When she went over the edge of the boat and fell into the water, what happens to,
Yeah. Yeah, when she went in, I do remember that now.
That was one of the favorite parts.
Because it was cold. It was the off season. I mean, it was
Lorraine was the wife,
the wife of Richard.
okay, and who was her husband?
Richard Fowler.
Okay. And do you remember Junior?
You know, Junior, I can't explain
There's
his
a
Junior.
Junior Fowler that goes to church at White Oak,
White Oak?
and he talks, you can't understand him.
That could be,
I
did
met some
Richard?
of the family.
But
His
Well,
given name is David.
What's that?
David Fowler.
His daddy's name?
No, that's
The guy's
his.
name, Junior's name is David?
Yeah.
You know, the younger, Edward
married Pearl.
Pearl. And they had some offspring, so that may
Okay.
well be I doubt it'd be a son, probably a grandson, and his name is Walker, right?
No, Fowler.
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 Fowler, okay,
Yeah.
Fowler, so he had to be,
Well, his mother was Lorraine.
He what?
His mother was Lorraine.
Oh, no.
is that right?
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
so-
she's buried up at
Well, then
over
that's,
at New Hope.
that's a younger,
Okay,
that's
let
a
me
younger
see.
son then.
Now, how old is
He's
Junior?
55, Carol.
56. He's same age as Brenda.
Well, I don't know how old Brenda is.
Well, yeah,
So
he's about
mid-50s,
56.
right? Around
Yeah.
mid-50s. And I'm mid-70s, so I'm 20 years older than he is. So at the time, he wasn't around at the time this happened, because I'm only like no more than 8 or 10 years old.
So they had, was it Peggy, the youngest one of those three girls? There was Velma Sue, Annis June, and I think
Or
Peggy.
June is his sister.
Sister. So this
And
is
Peggy is
Richard.
his sister.
Okay.
So
And
he
Peggy
this.
is-
I think I had just
When that-
forgotten. I think they had some more children after we knew
Denise
them.
June. Denise June.
Elise June.
Uh,
Is
That's what her driver's license shows.
is Junior pretty much an okay kind of guy? I mean, he's all there.
Denise
you know?
June.
No,
Fowler.
he's
He's marked up too, yeah.